Welcome. It's been a while since I've done a video on my tech bench series, but where I'm at is I have the tech bench here and I'm using it, but I'm not really organizing things well with it because I don't have any storage down here. So my plan was to put some drawers in here, but I don't know exactly what I want to do, and I've got a pile of junk off camera right down here. So what I want to do is just create a platform to put bins and such on under this. So if you want to see my other tech bench videos, I'll put a link in the description of my tech bench playlist, and I'll also put some links in the description to some products and things that I'm using on Amazon. And if you use those links, it helps me out a little bit and doesn't cost you anything extra. So let's head over to my shop and I'll show you what I have planned. Okay, so I purchased these 6-foot 1x6s. So a 1x6 is 5.5 inches wide. So I need a board that is around 27 7/8 inch wide to go along the bottom, or deep I guess you'd call it. And these together laid up are around 27 3/4, so just under that. Then I need a length around 63 3/4 inches, and these would be 72 inches or 6 foot. So widthwise, if I join these together, it should be just about right, and then lengthwise I'll have to cut off one or both ends. These are about $5.50 each, I think is what I paid for these. So this was around 25 bucks. So this definitely isn't the absolute best way to do this. This is the way I'm choosing to do it. So my plan here is to screw these boards together with Craig screws. And then later, if I want to change this up, I can just take all these apart and I can repurpose these boards for something else. Another way to do this would be to get a large sheet of plywood and just cut it up. And I don't have an easy way to transport plywood right now. I could have gone to Home Depot and they would have cut it for me. But this was easy to do with 6-foot boards. I could throw them right in my car. So I have quite a few tools, and some are pricey tools. I have a track saw that would work well for working with this. But I'm going to try and do this with some cheaper tools or more accessible tools, or if I use the more expensive tools for some things, I'm going to explain how you can use some cheaper tools to do similar things. So these boards are pretty good shape for being the lower quality. These are, I think, called quality, but quality isn't the high-end ones. The select are the higher-end ones, and they're quite a bit more expensive. And I bought these at Menards, if I didn't mention that. That's a Midwest home improvement store. And the boards are in pretty good shape, except for this one right here is bowed quite a bit. The other ones actually all have the same stamp on them. They all look a little better, and this one doesn't have that stamp, so it might have come from a different manufacturer. So I'll put the bowed one in the middle so I can try and spring that bow out. And I'm not looking to get this perfect. I just need a platform so I can set bins and things on it. So to get started, I'm going to mark out every 6 inches along this board. That's where I'll put my Craig screws. And I just need to mark one side of the board. So I can mark one board and then lay it up against the next one to mark the next board. I'm using this fast cap tape measure, and I'll put a link below to this. This is flat, it doesn't have that curve in it, so it sits really nice on top of a board for doing like woodworking. This would not be good for construction where you need to have it extend out to hook on the end of a board, but it's real nice for working on a bench like this. Okay, so I'm going to mark out every 6 inches, and I'll speed up the video during this part. So I can do the math pretty quickly in my head when doing something like this. Now on this fast cap ruler, if you're doing this a lot, there's a little edge here that you can make marks on with your pencil, so you can actually mark off every 6 inches. Otherwise, you can get a scrap piece of paper that's 6 inches and just, use it along with the ruler so you don't get off too far. And you can set it there and, move it along the ruler and make your measurements. That can speed things up for you if you're not good at just doing the math. So now I'll mark all the other boards. Okay, I marked them all out, and you don't have to worry about being super accurate with that. Now I could have laid a ruler across all of them and just drawn a line down all of them, but this didn't take very long. So now I want to drill pocket hole screws in all of these, and I'll show 2 different ways you can do that. So I just numbered all these boards so I can kind of keep them in the same orientation, although it shouldn't really matter. So I numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I also realized I marked this board and I don't need to screw into this board because the 4th board will screw into the 5th one. So I'll set the 1st board aside and not drill any holes in it. I also think I'll move this bowed board to the center. Okay, so I have the board in position here. I have it clamped down to my bench, and I'm using this Craig like vise kind of thing. And you certainly don't need one of these. You can use a regular clamp. You can clamp it to a table. If you have like a wooden picnic table outside, you could clamp it to that with just any kind of clamp. I really like these kind of quick grip type clamps. But this is just what I'm using here. And then for the Craig jig, I'm using this. And I'm just going to demonstrate this once. I actually have the K4 Master System, and this actually came with it. So you can use it portable like this, or you can use the Master System. But if you don't want anything this fancy, they have cheaper versions of this that have just 2 holes in it. This has 3 here, but they have some that just have 2, and you can get by with just 1. And then you can clamp it on and drill your holes. So if you plan on doing lots of projects with pocket holes, I really recommend something like the K4 or the K5 Master System. But if you're just doing some small projects or you want to get started out, you can buy some other kits. But I'll put a link below in the description if I can find one of those on Amazon. So I have my line there, and I'm going to line it up with one of these holes. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'll just kind of eyeball it and I'll clamp it on there. So I made sure to get it flush with this back edge. And this is an older style Craig clamp. I like these newer ones that automatically adjust. So the other one has a little turn knob here to adjust it. But I'll be using this for something else later. But you can use a C clamp on here if you want. You just need to make sure you don't smash this, but this is pretty tough stuff. So to drill, I'm actually just using a cheap electric drill. I think I paid 20 bucks for this one. You can use a cordless drill, but I really like corded drills. This one goes up to 3,000 RPM, so it's good for drilling. Now sometimes when you're drilling, you'll get some squeakiness. So I keep some candle wax nearby and I'll just melt a little bit on the drill bit when it gets hot, and it will alleviate some of that squeakiness. So to drill this, I'll just stick it in there, turn the drill on, press it in, pull it out. And I may need to stick it in and pull it out a couple times to clear the chips. So there are chips coming out here and they're coming out here. So you could have a vacuum there to suck those chips out while you're doing that. But I would keep a vacuum nearby. You can use anything from a shop vac to just a household vacuum hose attachment. You can get like a 1 gallon shop vac for 25 bucks, and I really like those for these kind of applications. And I'll be using it when I drill all of these here, and I'll show that in just a second. So I'll pull this clamp off now. And here we have our pocket hole. And you want to refer to the instructions so you have your depth collar on your drill bit set properly. And I'm not exactly on the line, but it's not a big deal. Okay, so this is the K4 pocket hole jig. I want to attach this down to my bench. You can clamp it here, or there's screw holes there, and you can actually use Craig screws to just screw that to a workbench surface. So this is a Festool bench, and I know a lot of people aren't going to have one of these. They're kind of pricey, but I'll use the Festool clamp and I'll stick it through the hole and clamp it down. But on a cheaper workbench, I'd probably just use a C clamp or something to clamp that to the bench. Now I'm going to take the insert out of here. I guess I should call it the drill guide. And there's markings on the side here. And I actually got this before they painted these. If you buy these now, I think they're painted white. But I actually filled this in with a mixture of flour and water, I think, and wiped it on here. And then wiped it off, and it made these white. So I'm doing 3/4 inch wood, so I need to line it up with the 3/4. I also have this spacer on the bottom here. I don't technically need this, but I'll just leave it on there. It doesn't hurt anything. So I'll stick that in. Slide it down and it says 3/4. So there's little grooves here. You can set your drill bit in there to set the depth stop on these. You don't have to measure it out or anything. So now I'll set the board in the position to drill the first hole. So I'm going to stick a scrap board in at the other side. This is just under 1 inch thick here. And this is, I don't know, I think a little over 3/4 or 3/4. But it'll lift it up enough, I think. I think I'll add a 1/4 inch scrap to that. So the nice thing about this jig is that it has an attachment for a vacuum, so I'm going to hook that up. The vacuum I'm going to use is a 1 gallon shop vac. Connects in just like that. Makes a big difference being able to clear the chips. Okay, so now I'll start drilling all these out. Okay, so it was a little tricky having this hang off the edge a lot, so I really should move this to the center, but I had it here thinking it would be probably easier to film. I don't know, I could have probably moved it, but I'm going to move it and then I'll do the other ones off camera and get all those drilled, and then we'll start putting it together. Okay, so now comes the tricky part. So the proper thing to do would have been to joint these and plane them and things like that, get them all super flat and straight and square. But I'm taking these off the shelf from the store, and there's a lot of bow and warp and stuff, well, mostly just bows. So What I'm going to try and do is clamp these together and then put a screw in there to hold it. And I'll do that along the length and hopefully it'll be okay. So I'm using these parallel bar clamps. You can also use pipe clamps. There's other clamps you can use. You do need to be careful though, because when you clamp boards like this, if there's any flex in it, you can get, especially when they get wider, these things can buckle and just snap up, like with a tremendous amount of force. So you do need to be careful there. One way you can help prevent that is to alternate your clamps. I only have 2 clamps here. I have a third one of these I could use. But you can put one on the bottom, one on top, one on the bottom, one on the top, alternate those back and forth, and that's a little bit safer. But this isn't necessarily a safety video, so you should try and learn the safety of your equipment before you use it either way. So for screws, I'm using 1 1/4 inch coarse pocket hole Kreg screws, and I wrote soft plywood on the top so I can easily see that. I have a box of fine too, and I like to buy the large boxes. This is a 500 count because I'll use these up eventually, and they're cheaper when you buy them in bulk. So to make sure that this seam is flush, I'll use my Automax clamp, and it has these large flat surfaces. So I'll clamp that on there, and then I'll clamp this together and then put the screw in. And if you haven't worked with Kreg screws, they are a square drive. You can also stick a Phillips drive in there, and then you can get this long extension that gives you good reach. And I'm just using this compact drill to screw them in, and I have the clutch set to 20. I backed the clutch off a little bit. I may adjust that a little more later. So now I'll go to the next one. I'll move down the board and I'll put screws in everywhere. So far so good. That seems pretty smooth across there. And I'm not making fine furniture, so it doesn't matter that much. So I have a pretty good sized gap here. We'll see if I can squeeze that together. So there's quite a bit of pressure under here, but it's holding for now. I could always put a second screw in there if needed. Now I could glue these joints, but like I said earlier, I want to be able to take this apart and reuse this wood for something else someday. So I have the first 2 boards together. Now I have to do the really warped one. I'm going to attach it in the middle first and then work towards the edges. So I'm going to clamp these edges and hit it with the dead blow to try and line everything up. So I put this clamp on the very end to kind of hold that flat. So far it's looking pretty decent, but it's hard to say how flat this is overall. It'll be interesting to see when it's done if the whole thing has a big twist in it or something. So I'm going to do the rest of this off camera, then we'll come back and look at it and see, if it looks flat, if it looks usable. This is a fair bit of work, but it's probably more work since I'm filming it. It'd be easier if I didn't have to work around the camera and such, because I've tripped on it multiple times already. Okay, I'll get this finished up and then we'll take a look. Okay, I have everything screwed together, and I still have the bottom up, so I put a straight edge or a ruler along it, and you can see it's bowed a little bit, so it's down maybe a ½ inch in the middle, and I'm pretty happy with this. I can press down on the sides and flatten it out, and this is going to be going down, so any weight I put on it will flatten it out, and I don't need this to be aesthetically flat. It's just, I don't know. It should be flat probably, but I guess the thing that I'm happy about here is that it's concave and it doesn't have a wave in it, so it's not high on one side and low on the other. So it'll be interesting to see how this fits in place once I get it in the bench itself, but thus far I'm not going to scrap it yet. Partway through I was thinking this was probably a bad idea, but I think it came out okay for what it is. So now I think I just need to trim it to length. So I'm going to get set up to do that. So the length I need is 63 3/4 inches, so I'll just round that up to 64 for now. And the whole thing is 72 inches, roughly. So I have 8 inches between 64 and 72. So what I'll do is I'll trim about 4 inches off each edge. So that puts me right about here. So I'll put this ruler at 64. And I'm just going to glance down at the other edge, and I see it's set back about the same here. I'm just double checking my measurements. So this will be my cut on this side, and then I'll measure again to the actual length of 63 3/4. I don't need to split hairs here on this first cut. The nice thing is that my pocket hole will be just a few inches from that edge, so it'll reinforce that edge. Now if I made a cut here, I might want to put another pocket hole screw here, but I think this is going to work out well. So now I want to make a square cut along this edge. And if you don't have a square that's big enough, I actually have a drywall square that would work for this. But if you don't, you can use math. So what you want to use is Pythagorean's theorem, and I'll explain this here. So we're going to create a triangle. So if you have a triangle, a right triangle here, and you have a side that's 3 and 4, then the long side will be 5. So if you did Pythagorean's theorem, this is what you would find out. So we can use this to check if something is square. And you can do multiples of these. So let's do my multiple of 6. So I'll say 3 times 6 is 18. 4 times 6 is 24. And 5 times 6 is 30. So if we measure 18 inches along the bottom, 24 inches up, we should get 30 inches this way. So I marked 4 inches over there. I'll just mark that again down here. I'm remeasuring it, so it may not be the same. Yeah, it's off a little bit. So now I need to measure 18 inches along this way, and actually I measured 4 here, so I can just make this 22. I'll add those two numbers together. Okay, so I have 18 there. Now I'll measure 24 inches this way. Now I don't know what is square, so I'll measure out the 24 inches and I'll almost draw like a little arc there. So now I'm going to measure from the mark on this edge to where I get 30. Now it's a little tricky to hook my tape measure along that edge, so when I put it on there I'm actually going to line it up with the 1. It's kind of hard to show on here. I'm going to line it up with the 1 here, and then I'll measure to 31. Okay, so I have the measurement out here where it was 24 inches and 30 where they intersected, so that should be a right triangle, and this line should be square to that edge. So I'm going to get my big square out and I'll check it and see if I got it right. So this, is bowed a little bit, but it's spot on. So it lines up right here and it lines up down there on those cross marks I made. So now I'll mark that out with my straight edge. So that's the line I need to cut. Okay, so to cut this straight, I'm going to be using a jigsaw, and I'm going to be using one of these Bosch T101 A0 or AO, I don't know, blades, and I'll put a link in the description to these, and this is a clean for wood blade. You can see it doesn't have any kerf on it, and these give it a super smooth cut. So I'll put the blade inside of the jigsaw here, and this is a Bosch jigsaw, but you could use any jigsaw. This has a little clamp you can press on the blade to make it straight. Then I took my ruler and I measured over the offset, and I got 1 9/16 inches here. It's really hard to show on camera. You have to trust me. So that's the offset. So if I put a straight edge along this side from the line, then it'll cut right on that line. So I did that here. I had this big piece of oak, but you could use anything straight. If you don't have anything straight, you can buy a straight edge. Generally, pieces of plywood, if you bought a 2 foot by 4 foot piece of plywood or hardboard, that'll have a pretty straight edge on it from the factory. You can always check that on some other straight surface. If you have a granite countertop in your house, which I don't, but if you did, that's a pretty good surface you could test if something is straight on. So to line it up, I measured it out and set this on here. I held it up against the board, like so, and then I tapped it back and forth till it read just right on 1 9/16. Then I clamped it down on both sides. I didn't use C-clamps or anything, I just used these quick clamps, and these can come loose, so I'll be watching if they come loose. So this saw does have an orbital mode, so I'll probably switch that to, I'll try it on 1. So that's supposed to help clear chips. That makes the blade go back and forth, and it has a blower mode on it. I'll turn the blower mode on too. So now I'll try and make this cut. So one problem you can have when using a jigsaw is the blade doesn't always stay perpendicular. And I can tell here that it kind of undercut here, so that's not a super straight cut. Now this blade is probably old and dull. It'd be better off if I had a new blade, but I'm using what I have. So a circular saw would probably work better here, but I wanted to demonstrate that you can cut with a regular jigsaw. And I do think the quality of the cut would be better with a new blade. I don't think it would undercut quite so much. It's also possible I was tilting the saw because normally I would stand right in front of it and I didn't want to block the camera. So now I'll flip it around and I'll do the same procedure. I'll measure off this edge I cut, measure over the 63 3/4, and I want to cut that a little bit short. So, you know, I might take it a pencil line in or so. I don't want it to go over. And I'll cut that, and then that should be the shape I need to fit in there. So I'm going to do that off camera, and I'll come back when that's done. Okay, that cut's finished, and that didn't turn out great either. Here's a little close-up. You can see the unevenness. At one point it was sparking. I'm not sure what was going on there. So a circular saw would definitely be a better tool for this. But if you're making rough stuff and a jigsaw is all you have, then it's what you have to work with. Now the cut on here is pretty smooth. I mean, it's not perfect, but that's an old dull blade. It's very smooth on the knot there, of course. And there's a little fuzziness here. That can be knocked down with a little sandpaper. And when I say a little, you can just take this and it's gone. So it doesn't take any effort at all. If you don't have a sanding block, you could use a nail file. So now I'm going to go attempt to fit this in the bench. So if you put this in and this is too wide, if this is sticking out this way too far, you could notch this to fit around here. So you would cut in a little bit this way and a little bit that way and cut a little notch, and then it would just stick proud a little bit. And you could hide that in the back too. And you could do that either dimension. You know, if it's too long, you could notch either side, and that would be easier than ripping down this whole side to make it even. Just do a notch. Okay, I got it in there. It was actually a little trickier to get in than I was expecting. So the final step will be to screw it down to the metal there, and that will actually pull it flat too. I need to get some short Kreg screws, so I used that long extension to put in the Kreg screws when I did the pocket hole joints. And if you watch my video on the tech bench build where I attached the top, you can use the extension to pass through this C channel and get from the bottom to the top to put screws in. And I need screws that are, you know, less than 3/4 of an inch so it doesn't go through the board. So I'll need to get some screws. But until then, gravity will hold it in place. It actually doesn't look bad down there. I mean, it almost looks like a piece of plywood, and you can't tell it was really curved. But since the crown is up, anything I set on it will kind of flatten it out. So I needed this shelf here, but I kind of wanted to do this as an experiment to see if you can take cheap wood, pocket, screw it together, and make something with it. And I could say for rough stuff, you can do that. You know, plywood would have been much easier. If I had a way to get plywood to my house really easy right now, I could have done it. And this spring I'll have a vehicle to do that. But right now, this was easy to load in my car. Now, if you wanted to make a table with this, say like a work table, you could put supports just on either side of this underneath, and that would make it flat too. And then you could sand down the top and paint it, and you could make a functional table out of this. So things that I would change is I probably wouldn't use the jigsaw to cut the edges. I'd probably use a circular saw. That would give me a better cut. And the boards were pretty good, except for that one was bowed a little more than the others. And if I'd taken a little bit more time to find better boards, that would have worked. And needless to say, the better way to do it would be to joint, plane, saw, rip, you name it. Do all the fancy stuff you would do with wood to make a nice panel. I was trying to do it the cheap, easy way to see what kind of results I would get. So that's all I'm going to cover in this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you like this video, please click like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd appreciate it if you could do that. And thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.